So, like, we are now seeing the image of the Joys of Yiddish as it's installed now and will be, I hope, forever at the Haus der Kunst, facing the garden above an important gathering point. But I want to go back to 2006 when the work, in a slightly different form in terms of the words that are written and also the place where it is, was actually, I don't know when it was conceived, but appeared for the first time. And I wanted to ask you whether you can tell us something about this. I can just say is the Spartus Institute of Jewish Studies in Chicago. And the work was up doing the building of the institute. And
It was
yes.
actually the renovation.
Uh-huh.
But as you can see, it was a very serious renovation. They took the whole building apart.
Mm-hmm.
The curator, it's basically an educational institution, but they also have a gallery and a curator. And she called me and said, well, we have this, protective wall in the front of the building so nobody walks on the sidewalk there. And we're thinking of doing a series of exhibitions or installations. And the subject is the language barrier, because this was a barrier and they called it the language barrier. Would you like to do something? Well, let me think about it. So I was brought up not in an Orthodox, but in a religious home. And both my parents were immigrants, as were my grandparents, obviously, and they all spoke Yiddish. Basically, they were not really interested in us kids learning Yiddish because the idea was it was a secret language that they could talk about us while we were sitting there and we didn't know what they were saying. But sooner or later, you figured it out. Okay. So the notion of a language barrier made me think that for Jews, the language barrier was that they didn't speak English. They spoke Yiddish. They had to learn a new language. But that over the years, Yiddish had become anglicized. And Yiddish words had entered the English language. In a lot of instances, because of comedians. There was a great era in the 50s of Jewish comedians, like Mel Brooks and Woody Allen and Mort Saul. And so Yiddishisms snuck into the general population through TV. So this is the list that I came up with, which, as I've said about Yiddish, it's an ironical, scatological language, just filled with words that can be quite insulting. And there is a book called The Joys of Yiddish, which came out in the 50s or 60s, I think. And it's like a dictionary. So I went through that book and I chose these words, which I thought most American Jews, certainly of my generation and maybe the previous generation, but not necessarily the next generation, would have heard, would have known. So I presented this to the curator, who presented it to her committee, who said, well, maybe it's a little too Jewish. And some of these words are not necessarily nice. They're not dirty or obscene or anything, but they're a little insulting. So can you change this? No, I'm not changing anything. It's a work of art. You can't change a work of art. I said, but try to think of it as the words are also funny. They're very funny. So eventually they came back to me and said, okay, fine. Yeah, they're funny, and we'll go with it. It's funny. So then the director of installations at the Spertus calls me and he says, are these the colors that you want to use on this work? Yeah. He said, do you know what these colors symbolize? And I said, yeah. He said, the armbands that the Nazis forced the Jews to wear? I said, I know that. He said, well, when I tell the curator and the committee that, I don't think they're going to go for this. So I said, look, let's just keep that a secret, okay? Don't tell them. And either they'll figure it out or they won't figure it out, but it'll already be done. And he was an artist and he kind of smiled and said, okay, all right, let's see what happens. I don't know if they ever figured it out because they never said anything to me about it. But at the opening, a woman was there who was the curator of the Jewish Museum in Vienna. And she said, oh, I love this work. It's so fantastic. But you know, I couldn't possibly show it in Vienna. Really? Why? Well, because the right wing would be furious about it. Oh, really? She said, yes, and so would the left wing. They would also be furious. I said, that's the perfect reason for showing it. If you can do something that makes everybody furious, it has to be interesting. No, she said, no, it's too provocative. It's too provocative. We can't do it. So that's the Chicago story.
Thank you. Thank you for responding. All question I had in mind, like where the title comes from, and particularly why did you choose this specific color and why it was important for you. And if we jump to 2013, then we see the work inhabiting the facade of the Haus der Kunst, where it stayed until 2019. And you very kindly decided to donate the work in 2016 to the Haus der Kunst and to make room to a facade intervention conceived by the artist Elena Tsui. The work was dismantled and very carefully preserved, kept in the basement. And that's where our story begins from, because when the day I was appointed to become artistic director of the Haus der Kunst, I worked to the Haus der Kunst finally, and I found a label, and I didn't understand what this label was about. And I was wondering what this label was indicating, and I had really no clue. And then I started talking with the curators, and I quickly got the answer that the label was referring to a work that was up there by Mel Bochner. And so I did my research. I, incredibly enough, do not remember having seen the work myself, despite coming to the Haus der Kunst. But I think it depends on the fact that I came many times at night. The work had another iteration, meanwhile, in Paris in 2017. So it had another apparition at the Jardin des Tuileries with the same sequence of words that was at the Haus der Kunst. And I started becoming more and more obsessed with the form of the Haus der Kunst, with all the stereotypes the Haus der Kunst is, let's say, dealing with the problems, but also the story of an institution that is like highlighted for its own seven first years of life, and somehow very rarely consider the 70 following years. On the other hand, an institution that is seen as a sort of moment of power, of linguistic power in town, but actually very rarely as the door to the town if one comes to from the garden, and has to do with green, and also is a real door you could in principle walk through and you can see from above. And that's where the idea started to, given the institution, the building is completely symmetrical, to think about, is there any room to consider this work be displayed on this side, mostly because the work asks something, asks specifically something. And this is the function of art, like asking questions. And this, as you can see, is the place where the bar is, where people gather, they hang out. And there is also room to stay, to walk, to sit, and to see. And that was a clear conclusion. Say, this is the place that should host the work if Mel is open to this idea, because then it's no longer on the front. But as a human being, I always think this, and as I experienced the institution last summer, this is somehow the real gathering point, the place where you don't go through to enter something, but the place where you hang out after having seen something, having had an experience, and you breathe and you question, and the question remains with you. And this is an image of the reinstallation. Meanwhile, we had a dialogue, and you incredibly kindly accepted the proposal. So this happened at the beginning of February. And before going to this, I leave the crane. I wanted to ask you something about the work itself. What I really love is that it's actually a list. It's not a sentence, it's a list of names. And what I also really love, if one sees the work from the outside as it is extolled now, is that there is a comma after the last work, the word, Plattgemacher. So you imagine it can continue. And I wonder, why did you want to keep that comma, which looks like a mistake, but actually is not?
Well, it's something that comes out of the thesaurus paintings that I had been doing. My feeling is that language is endless. You know, language is experience, and experience is endless. So the comma represents a pause between words or sentences or phrases, but also that there's something more, that it continues, that you haven't reached the end. And that for me has been a very important idea for a long, long time.
And how
when language first started to enter contemporary art in the mid and early 60s, there were painters who used words in their paintings, like Jasper Johns and Rauschenberg, and then Ed Ruscha. But the language rarely had a reference to language itself. It wasn't that much different than when Picasso or Braque, put a word in a painting. It becomes an abstraction. And I'm very glad you mentioned the idea of lists, because lists is a very important idea for me. And there's a very great French-Romanian, I guess, author named Georges Perec, who said that there is nothing in the world that can't be entered onto a list of some kind. So there's nothing in the world that's more important than anything else, because the thing about a list is it creates an equality between the words that are there. Even if they don't mean the same thing, or if they're shades of meaning, or if they're friendly or antagonistic to each other, they're on a list, and a list means one thing follows another. So the comma is, to me, as important as the words themselves.
Thank you. This is really enlightening. And of course, like now, seeing the crane in front of us, the question that comes is, why did you go for that specific location on the front, but actually on that specific location above the columns? Why did you decide that work that appeared in another form, on a stone, on a barrier, deserved now to be put high up on that specific point?
Well, I think the building is amazing, quite frankly. You know, I understand the historical problematic of it, the reasons why it was built. I had some very nice long conversations with a woman whose name I don't remember, unfortunately, who's the historian of the building.
Sabine Brandtler.
Yes, and she showed me the original drawings. And so this whole kind of neoclassical facade, this fascistic neoclassical facade, which is neoclassicism without any decoration, any humanity to it. Here was this pediment, which in classical Greek architecture always had something there. You know, the Parthenon frieze. And so it struck me that there was an irony to sort of duplicating in its position and its continuity and its endlessness the Parthenon frieze in Yiddish. Mm-hmm. It just seemed funny. It seemed political to me. It definitely seemed political. And both Oakley and Ulrich were very enthusiastic about the idea and very supportive. And, you know, it's one of those things that it comes into your mind and you do it, you know, you feel you have to do it. It has its own pressure, its own meaning behind it. I'll tell you an amusing story about the opening. It was very cold. It was the winter. My wife and daughter came with me during the installation. And we were going to a dinner party somewhere. I can't remember where. And we took a taxi and we stopped at a corner to buy a bottle of wine to take to the dinner. And around the corner, I heard this music. And I said, that's a klezmer band. What is a klezmer band, which is Jewish jazz of the 30s? What is a klezmer band doing in Munich in sub-zero weather playing outdoors? So I went around the corner, and there were these three guys and a woman, amazing musicians. It turned out they were Russian. They were actually classical musicians. They would come to Munich because they earned very little money in Russia and play street music and, have a cup, and people would put money in the cup. So I said to the guy playing the clarinet, it was a clarinet, an accordion, and what was the other instrument? Gee, I'm forgetting. I'm sorry. I said, do you do social parties or anything? Yeah. How much is it? 300 euros. Are you busy next Monday night? He said, speak to my wife. She's the manager. So I go to the, yes, we can do it. We can do it. Where? Haus der Kunst. Be there at 7:00. So you came into the museum, and there was this klezmer band playing Jewish music right in the entrance hall of the Haus der Kunst. And people were first flabbergasted and then thrilled, because it seemed to be such a sweet transgression that it didn't announce itself as having a meaning or a point or a purpose, but you couldn't help but get it. And so between the Joys of Yiddish and the Joys of Klezmer, it was a fabulous event. It was a really fabulous event.
Wonderful. What a beautiful story. What I love is that there is an idea of power and form of empowerment that belongs to the outsider. And the outsider now being the work outside, the language of the outsiders, because actually Yiddish is, as you tell us, the language that comes from a ghetto in which someone tries to still communicate in a foreign and hostile environment with a code and deal with the reality. And you taking the outsiders in the building and making them resonating with the whole narrative that you established, and somehow generating also a new medium. And this is what I love. I mean, this building was born under the dramatic terrible, I mean, tragic ideology of propaganda. I mean, it was supposed to be a propaganda building, and you turn it in a soft and critical and politically addressing machine of propaganda nowadays. And that's why somehow also we thought this work must be like hanging above people gathering, because this language can always generate questions, but actually art is generating questions. And this about the question of hanging and suspending, I couldn't think but like get back to your well-known artwork that I spoiled quickly, not to exist without a sustaining support, which has not so much to do, but actually to me has so much to do with the Joys of Yiddish, because the work says so much about the Joys of Yiddish, says so much about your work, but says so much about also how art functions, right? And a specific kind of art, asking and addressing specific questions. I hope you are not upset for me bringing up this work and making
why would I be
connection. Of course,
no,
last but not least, I should say I am also fascinated by the fact that it kind of reminds me the idea of a writer, a graffiti artist, like taking its space and tagging it, right? And like going against the idea of the language barrier, right? So there are so many layers resonating that I wanted to put it in dialogue with everything you could say, and you said
Well,
actually.
it was in fact inspired, this format, um, the square with an unfinished side. Uh, Again, the leakage is to me the fact that language is always open, it's always dripping, it's always coming apart.
Mhm.
And probably the main, but not only, inspiration for this series of works was the 1968 student rebellion in Paris, when suddenly all the walls and the streets and everything were covered with graffiti, but it wasn't the graffiti like in the United States where people write their names on the wall. It was political, but not um, not really propagandistic. Like, for example, one of the most famous ones they wrote on the wall: beneath the paving stones, the grass. That's a beautiful thought. It just says everything. Beneath the paving stones, the grass. Um, and so I thought, well, you can reach people very directly by writing on the wall. And at that particular moment, uh, something that I call neo-conceptual art was thriving, where artists were saying things like, a work of art can just be a word or a language, it can just be spoken. Uh, it doesn't need to be anchored to a physical representation. But I couldn't buy that. I couldn't accept that, because what you get then is a kind of tautology, something that is empty of experience. So this was directed at that. No thought exists without a sustaining support. Something has to keep it alive. Something has to be there that you can see. And that's why one is a visual artist, or that's my definition.
Well, thank you for saying that. This is like um, incredibly pertinent. And a new artwork is also the invention of a new technology. And what I admire from the way the work was installed first is the fact that, yes, it adapted to the architecture, but it made also technology. The architecture somehow enters the artwork, so to say. It becomes a guest rather than being its host, and this is very subtle because you didn't squat like the advertisement empty space. You just transform the entire architectural device, which, as you said, is very beautiful. So this I found profound and important. It's also the reason why we wanted to bring it back, but to bring it back like literally suspended above people, and also like honestly, not never been completely graspable. This is not a work you can make a selfie with at all.
Yes, yes,
There
yes.
is too much horizon, and you're somehow twist because you have to stay with it. It stays with you. It's like a balloon, an open balloon. So I this is the reason why we were fascinating. We wanted to install it there.
Well, I'm very happy that you did reinstall it. You did bring it back to life, because I think we're living through a political and social moment in civilization where the rise of white nationalism and racism has become irrefutable. And hopefully this work says something to that, or without saying it directly, because I don't like to say things directly. I want, as you said, it to be a question. Like I want somebody to come up to this and say, what does that mean? Why is it there? And as soon as you can get a person to ask that question, why is that there? They might be led down the path of their own thought. And that's so much, to me, more interesting and more fruitful, let's say, than bombasting them with slogans. Mm-hmm. Slogans go nowhere. Slogans go nowhere.
I have a question now. Well, on the one hand, thank you for saying this. This is a very unique moment in the history of our society, but also in the history of art. And this is a moment in which monuments are taken down. Artists are keen on working in the public space, are asking for working in public space. Seen from a broader perspective, I really felt the responsibility of installing something differently that was already there rather than commissioning something new. And this was I think it's a statement. I hope it's seen like this and not as a provocation. But I had a lot of ethical questions to myself and say, is this what we should do? And I thought this could be an interesting dialogue with what's happening everywhere where everything is being taken down and so heavily criticized. But now comes my question. It's like you are very explicit in saying that abuse of power begins from the abuse of language, and to confront ideologies and hidden agendas of language is a central preoccupation for you. Is it something that you believe this work does, or you wanted to do with this work?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, when I first installed it, a journalist asked me, did you do, with a lot of hostility, did you do this to provoke the people of Munich? And I said, well, I did it as a provocation to make people think, to make them realize that this language is now dead. Wittgenstein said, a language is a way of life. So when all the Jews, and they were like, they say 12 million Yiddish speakers, of which half were, annihilated. It killed the language and it killed a way of life. And that way of life, it seems to me, is an enormous black hole, an enormous emptiness in German society, in German life, in Polish society, in Romanian life, in Romanian society, in Russian life, in Russian society. And so I would hope this is a reminder in a way, or makes people consider, think about that loss, about that emptiness, because it can't be filled again. It can't.
I think that I didn't hear such a poignant and sincere and dramatic definition of what monuments are for in a long time. I think you described exactly the function of the monument and how important it is. So I can only thank you, because this is a gift. We are bringing at the Haus der Kunst a monument with us, and a monument about something that is no longer there. It's what monuments are supposed to be. I'm sure you agree with this.
I do. I do.
Mel, I have the feeling we could continue for a long time, but I don't want to say everything, because we want to keep the promise of continuing the conversation with myself, with Sabine Brandl, with the community that wants to reach and has been touched by your intervention, on the terrace underneath the Joys of Yiddish, hopefully next summer. So I can only thank you for your generosity. I, I love the way you share your art and your view of the world. And thank you again for your generosity, for accepting this proposal, but already donating the work in 2016. You can't imagine how important it is for this building, for this town, for this state, and in general for art in this moment to have the privilege to host such a suspended monument that will be asking many, many questions. So all our thank you.
Well, all my thanks to you um, for reinstalling this, first of all, and for understanding it, second of all, which is probably more important.